I'm Erica Wagner. I'm the deputy comment editor of The Observer, and I'm really thrilled to be here at Sunday Papers Live with our narrative editor, Chloe Hatchmatheo, who is going to talk to us about The Salt Path, this incredible story that she discovered behind the popular memoir of the same name. Please give Chloe a huge round of applause. She's amazing. So I want to briefly take us all back. Just tell us quickly what The Salt Path is, a memoir published in 2018, and what you discovered.
So, if you are like I was when this first came across my path and had no idea what this book and who the author are, you've probably been living under a rock, as I realised I was. It's hard to overstate how massive this book has been. So it's been one of the most popular books of the last 10 years in the UK. It's sold 2 million copies. It's been translated into over 25 languages. And it's written by a woman called Rayner Winn. And The Salt Path essentially tells the story of a couple who lived in a house in Wales, and through no fault of their own, they were conned out of their home by somebody they believed was a good friend who persuaded them into a business deal. They have their home repossessed, and the same week they find out that this is going to happen, they go to the doctor, and the husband, Moth, is given a terminal diagnosis by his doctor. He's got a neurological condition that's very fast progressing and is fatal, and there is no treatment or cure. And so, faced with these absolutely, two devastating situations in their life, they take a very radical decision. They decide to put rucksacks on their back and walk the entire southwest coastal path, which is 630 miles. And they do that over 18 months with a short break in the winter. And the book essentially tells the story of this journey and the people they meet along the way, and also something really quite incredible that happens along the way, which is that Moth finds that his condition, which is incredibly difficult at the beginning, he's finding it difficult to put his rucksack on. By about, a month and a bit in, he realizes that he's feeling a lot better, and his movements are much easier, and essentially the walk, the strenuous activity of putting one foot in front of another, and also being in nature, complete immersion in nature, those two things have essentially reversed his condition. And that's the story of The Salt Path. Rayner Winn goes on to write 2 more books, also Sunday Times bestsellers, that follow a very similar formula.
And I just want to say, not just bestsellers, but prize-winning books.
Oh yeah, I mean she's won literary prizes.
So she has sort of success across the board, not just bestsellers, but literary acclaim.
Massive, and. Yeah, shortlisted for literary prizes, won literary prizes. Huge.
Won the Royal Society of Literature's Christopher Bland Award, which is very prestigious.
Reward. Huge. And she was in every magazine, on every chat show sofa, everywhere.
And there's a movie.
There's a movie with Gillian Anderson and Jason Isaacs. Hollywood sort of came knocking. But she wrote a second and third book, which very much followed a similar kind of formula, if you like. Moth now has stopped walking, and his illness has come back, and it gets worse. And then in the second book, The Wild Silence, they go on another walk, and his condition improves again. And the third book, Landlines, goes even further with this. At the beginning of Landlines, he has a brain scan, and he's really bad now. And the neurologist says to him, look, your brain is closing down. The lights are switching off. This is kind of, you're coming to the final stages here. And Rayner Winn pushes him really hard and says, we must go on another walk. At the beginning of the book, he's not making it to the toilet. He's lying in his own pee. It's like really distressing. They go on an even more strenuous walk, this time from Scotland down to Cornwall, the length of the Isle. And he makes a miraculous recovery again. They go back to the neurologist, and the neurologist scans his brain and says, this just can't be happening, but this is the scan of a normal patient. There is no sign of the illness here. And they're very categorical that it is this immersion in nature and the walk that has cured him. And today, Moth has been living with this condition apparently for 18 years. The normal trajectory this condition follows is 6 to 8 years. That's the life expectancy. But he's been going 18 years, and he attributes this to his walks.
So that's the story we're presented with, or not. And that's where you come in.
Yeah, that's where I come in. So last March, I got a little ping in my Instagram from a complete stranger. And this happens, people hear that you're an investigative journalist and everyone's got a story for you. And we get all of these kind of tips that never lead anywhere. And they're just not anything. And this one came in my inbox, and I just, again, thought, oh, this is probably nothing. It's a book. I'm not an arts reporter. I don't think this is for me. But I started looking into it, and he said, I know Rayner and Moth, this person, and I have suspicions that they're not telling the truth. And what this person did was furnish me with 2 pieces of information that were not in the public domain. They said, I think you should look into whether or not they've lied in their books. The first thing that I should tell you is that they're not using their real names. Their real names are nowhere to be found in public. Sally Walker and Tim Walker. And so my first thing is, really, are they nowhere in public? But they really weren't. And a little bit of me was saying, why are their real names not in public? And also, if your name is Sally Walker and you're writing a book about walking, why would you change your name, right? So, and then the second thing was the name of the place in Wales where they had their house repossessed. Again, nowhere in the public domain. So furnished with these 2 pieces of information, I went and spoke to my editor, who, the first thing my editor said was, this person had said, the person who gave me the tip said, I don't think Moth is ill, as he claims. I don't think he's dying. And my editor said, look, this is really hard to prove. You're trying to prove a negative. If somebody doesn't want to share their medical history with you, and they have absolute right to have privacy over their medical history, how can you prove this? I'm not sure this is a story. And I said, well, look, there's Wales and their names, and apparently there's loads of rumours swilling around Wales about this couple. And he said, yeah, Welsh rumours, not a story. But he said, look, you can go to Wales and have a dig around. And so he gave me a few days, and I went down to Wales, and what I uncovered was really quite remarkable.
Where did you take us back sort of to that first trip to Wales? What was your aha moment?
Actually, strangely, the aha moment was a little bit in Wales, but also sort of in the run-up to Wales, I started doing a bit of research. And the first thing was I went to the land registry and said, OK, well, let's see whether there's a record of this house being repossessed. And so I start digging into all the paperwork that's publicly available about this house and under these names. And the first thing I find is that Sally and Tim Walker had taken out a second mortgage on their house that was essentially a private mortgage. An individual had lent them £100,000 on their home. That's weird. I don't know anyone who's got a private mortgage in that way from an individual. So I was immediately, that sort of raised questions for me. Who is this person? Why has he lent them the money? Why do they need another £100,000 above and beyond their own mortgage? So I start looking into that, and I'm following that sort of question. And then I go and find that the house that they used to live in is now an Airbnb. I think, great, I'll rent a room there. And I speak to the lady who has bought the house since, and she says, yeah, it's really weird. I'm getting all these letters through the door, debt letters, debt collection letters, bailiff notices. These people, Sally and Tim Walker, owe a lot of money. And there are also these strange documents in here which seem to be letters from France for unpaid bills. And so I speak to a French colleague, and he says, well, those are property taxes. You would only get those if you own a property. So I then contact the French authorities and find that Sally and Tim Walker bought a property in France. So now I'm asking a question, were they really homeless? If you own a property in France, it's very difficult to call yourself completely homeless, right? And then I start digging into Wales and this idea that the rumours were that she had worked at an estate agent, property surveyor, and she'd stolen a lot of money. Actually, the rumours were that she'd stolen a lot of money from her employer and then murdered him. And when I found this man was dead, but when I found his widow, she said, no, he died of cancer, and there's no murder. But she said, look, Sally Walker worked for us as a bookkeeper for 7 years, And we couldn't work out why our business wasn't making any money. I put it down to my husband being a bad businessman and not really charging people properly. But eventually we found that their money was missing, and we looked into it, and we found that Sally Walker had stolen £64,000 from us. It's a lot of money today. It was a lot of money in 2008 when this happened. She was arrested by the police. She was questioned, and she was allowed to go home and asked to return the next day, and she didn't. She did a runner. She went down to London, and I traced the widow of the man who had lent them this private mortgage. He was actually a relative of the husband, Moth's, and Sally Walker had run down and said to him, "I'm desperate. I know you're wealthy and your family. I'm going to go to prison. I cannot persuade my employer not to press charges against me. Please help." And so he lent his relatives, Sally Walker and Tim Walker, or Rayner Winn and Moth, £100,000. She used that money to get an expensive solicitor, and she contacted her former employer and said, "Look, I'll pay back the £64,000, and I will pay all solicitors' fees on both sides, but it will be a non-admissions basis," so she was not accepting that she'd stolen the money, "and you are not allowed to talk about it ever again." And so she made that problem go away, essentially. Then the police decided not to press any charges and not to follow up with it, but now they had a new problem, which was £100,000 on their house. The man who lent them the money went bust very quickly afterwards, and the debt transferred from him to men he owed money to. And those men called in the debt really quite quickly. And the Walkers, in their story, claim that there's a legal battle that goes on for a couple of years, and then the judge says that their house should be repossessed, and they have a week to get out. In reality, they had about 4 years, more than 4 years, to repay that debt. Lots of court appearances. The judge gave them a year to repay. And when eventually the judge found against them, it was another 6 months before the bailiffs moved in. When the bailiffs did move in, the couple were long gone already.
It's such an extraordinary story, and there are so many ways that we could go in. I want to kind of cut to the chase a little bit about the difference between publishing a book, and being an investigative journalist, telling the kind of story you were telling. Because I think there was a lot of surprise when your remarkable story came out, was how did, it was published by Michael Joseph, which is a very big and successful imprint of Penguin. How did none of this come out? And what are your feelings about Penguin? And then we'll talk about how Rayner Winn responded to what you wrote.
Yeah. So I think essentially it's very difficult. I think, first of all, memoir is a kind of contract with the reader, right? You're saying this is true. This is true. There is no such thing as ultimate truth. Memoir is a curated story. You are presenting your version of events to the reader. But there is a contract going on about truth. And I think there is a very big difference between curation of events and omission. You can never publish everything. That would be deeply boring. But I think what we find in Rayner Winn's case is not omission, but actually creation. She's made up stuff. She has presented herself and her husband as these victims who had horrible bad luck, and she has presented her husband as somebody who is dying. Neither of those things seem to be true. And so I think the contract of truth as a memoir writer, I think, has been broken. In terms of Penguin, I think it's really difficult because you can't expect a publisher to be an investigative journalist and be going down to the land registry and going to small villages in Wales. It's not really what publishers can do. They make an author sign a contract saying that I'm legally responsible for the truth of what I've written. But I think there is one thing that I would say, which is when there are remarkable claims being made about health, I think there is an obligation on a publisher to check that and double check that, because there are very real consequences to misleading people about something, particularly a terminal illness. When you get a terminal diagnosis, you and your family are desperate to find some hope somewhere. So if you read this book, however fantastical the claims in it might be, you just want to cling to it. And I've spoken to people who are dying from corticobasal degeneration, this specific, very rare neurological condition, who read the book and just thought, God, maybe the doctor's wrong. I can't walk. I'm exhausted even if I walk for half an hour, but maybe I just have to keep pushing. Maybe it's my fault that I'm not trying hard enough. And so I think there is an obligation on publishers to make sure that these kinds of claims are being checked.
There is a kind of, I want to say, pretty stringent disclaimer on the inside of the book, which I think you and I even discussed.
Yeah.
It's that unusual. It was more, you often see in memoirs, this is based on a true story, or these are the facts as I recollect them. But when you look at the small print on the publishing details of the Salt Path, it says something quite striking.
It's true. It's unusually wordy and lengthy disclaimer about the health stuff being put in the book. And I should say Rayner Winn has said that she has not sort of made huge medical claims about being able to cure corticobasal degeneration, but that she has just recounted her husband's very specific experience. I don't think that's true. Her books do make very, very detailed medical claims. She talks about medical studies.
She's very specific.
Very specific. And her husband has also said, I am alive because I walked. I mean, it's categorical.
And I think it's worth, I'm fascinated by the subject of memoir, and I think a comparison, has been made between, another famous case of a quote-unquote debunked memoir, which is James Fry's book, A Million Little Pieces, but where he wrote about his experience of drug abuse and being incarcerated. And he absolutely, and he was pilloried for exaggerating that, which he copped to. He didn't care if it was a novel or a memoir. But he was only talking about himself. He was exaggerating things that happened to him. Other people weren't brought into it. And one of the things I want to come to now is all the people who could identify themselves in the Salt Path and what they said to you.
So, I mean, this is the sort of next stage of the investigation was, well, if they're not telling the truth about their origin story, how they lost their home and how they came to be walking, and they're not telling the truth about him dying, could they not be telling the truth about walking in the first place? Maybe the entire walk, which is the sort of backbone of the entire book, isn't true. So I started trying to find people that they'd met along the way. Rayner Winn says she's changed the names of these people. They're real. She's changed their names to protect them. And I managed to locate a few of them, and particularly an Australian couple who meet the Rayner Winn and Moth very briefly near the beginning of the book in a cafe. And I found this Australian couple who said, yeah, we met Tim and Sally Walker as we knew them then. They were very lovely. They had a sad story about Tim not being well. We got on with them very well. And then we suddenly saw their pictures in a magazine when we were back in Australia. And we said, wow. So we reached out to them and we said, this is amazing. You've written a book about this. It's incredible. But why are you using weird names? And why do you say that we met you 2 years before we did? And why are you walking in the wrong direction in the book? So essentially, this couple said, yes, we did meet them, but we met them 2 years after they claim. And then I met other people who met them in 2013, who met them in 2015, who met them. And so the story of whether or not they did the walk is very, very messy. And I've got to a stage now where it seems that they did not do the walk as they claim to have done it, and perhaps not all of it. There is more coming out. I've continued investigating since my first revelations. Next Sunday, there will be a new article and a TV documentary on the Monday and a podcast series coming with even more information about what is true and what is not true in the book.
I think it's fair to say, Chloe, that when although of course you investigated this story to the best of your ability and we were thrilled to publish it in The Observer, did the response surprise you?
Well, you know, you do something like this, and I just have to say, first of all, that as a journalist, it's exciting to come across something like this, which is a very obvious public lie and essentially a con, which is what this looks to be. And you're sort of pulling a curtain and you're able to reveal something to the public that's quite surprising and shocking. So that's quite exciting as a journalist. What's not exciting is knowing that these two people on the end of it, Rayner Winn and Moth, who I don't know and I have nothing against, are going to be pretty devastated by what I publish. And of course, we give them plenty of opportunity to respond. And because the takedown that we were doing of their reality and their truth was so big, I was expecting perhaps, you know, legal blocks, threats from lawyers, and we didn't get that. Essentially, what we got was a message from their lawyer with a statement saying, yes, but this is our truth. And that's it, really. She went on 1 week later to publish a longer rebuttal on her website in which she said my investigation was grossly unfair and misleading, although she didn't really explain which particular bits of it she thought were that. She continues to maintain that somebody did con them out of their house, even though she acknowledged the fact that she was arrested and paid off this money on a no admissions basis. She maintains that her husband is dying and that she's told the truth about his condition. And she's then cut all public appearances, and there has been no word from her since. Nobody has seen her and nobody has heard from her. Penguin, I thought, was even more surprising because Penguin absolutely refused to engage in any way whatsoever. And then after a couple of weeks, they published a short statement in the Bookseller, which is an industry publication behind a paywall. So in essence, they were speaking to their industry, but not to readers, because readers wouldn't be able to see it. And Penguin said, we did all due diligence. We think we were fine, and we never heard any concerns from anybody about this author. And that's it.
I also want to talk to you, though, about the public response, that how you thought this story would be received by our readers, and it seems really to have struck a chord with people. I mean, one of the things that strikes me is we love stories of transformation and rescue. I would say particularly in Britain, actually connected with walking. I think of successful novels like Rachel Joyce's The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. And then even more recently, David Nichols' You Are Here, Stuck, which is a story, again, of someone's life being transformed by walking. We also have a huge kind of wellness, for want of a better word, industry. But readers have really responded to this story in our post-truth world that we're all living in. How does this story kind of broaden out to you when the President of the United States is saying there's a great economy when there's not a great economy? When, you know, this is, the words you used just then was Rayner Winn said, this is our truth. I wonder if people have had enough of that.
I kind of think they have. And I think the reason, I mean, I have to say it was, we were really shocked by the response to this. We thought it would be a big story, but the Sunday that it came out, it was like we sort of broke the internet. It went insane. There was like a tsunami of messages of people contacting me, really feeling betrayed. And I think the reason why is because we do feel that people are lying to us in modern life. You know, you look around, politicians are lying to you. You know, as a woman, you feel the beauty industry is lying to you, the health industry is lying to you. You know, you see lies everywhere, and you're wary of that, and you don't trust a lot of what you see. But then you pick up a memoir, and you don't expect to see it coming from there. And so you sort of open your heart to this book. And I have to say, I've never read The Salt Path in that way, because I always read it with a sort of critical eye and a suspicious eye. But I know that very, very smart people I know read that book and were really deeply moved and affected by it and believed it. And it's only when you look at it with a critical eye, that you see the sort of emperor's new clothes. There are lots of things in it that just don't add up. But the reason people didn't see it is because they're not expecting it to come from there. And they really opened their hearts to this couple. And I think they felt deeply, deeply betrayed.
I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So I'm going to open up to questions now, and then we might come back to our conversation. There's someone right here.
Yes, so do you want to go over there, yeah.
Thanks, hi there. It seems like the majority of the blame or the guilt is being placed on her, perhaps naturally as she's the named author, but I was interested to hear your opinion on how complicit you think he is, or whether he is, you know, whether it's her personal vanity project and he's caught up in it and is sort of going along and can't say no.
Shall I take that before we
Yes.
get to So I don't want to give away too much because we're going to be publishing more stuff, as I said.
You're making a documentary, too.
The documentary comes out on Monday, and the feature in the Observer comes out next Sunday. We thought it was going to be this Sunday, but we've had to move it back. So I think this new investigation will show that he is more complicit. And aware. And I think if you just take what's publicly available, the interviews that he's done, he very clearly publicly states, this is how we lost our home, this is why we walked, and I am alive today because I walked the Southwest Coastal Path. So I think if we decide that these things are not true, he doesn't have corticobasal degeneration. I'm not saying he's not unwell. I don't know. He may be a very unwell person. He doesn't have this condition, according to all the neurologists I've spoken to who specialise in it. Then he is at least complicit in that part of the lie, yeah.
Thank you. Would this book have sold as fiction, is part A, and part B? It's not that easy to get a book published if you're a part-time accountant in Wales. So how calculated was she in putting the medical stuff in, knowing that that might tip it over? I mean, I kind of have a bit of respect for her. She hit all the right boxes, you know?
She totally did. And I think that's actually a good question.
That's a very good question.
And something I've had from people is like, did she set out to con people in this way? And I think it's highly, highly unlikely. Like, if you want to get rich and become a millionaire, writing a book is not the best way. Like, there are easier ways to get rich, right?
And there are easier cons.
Much easier cons. But what is interesting is that this is not Rayner Winn's first book. Although she has claimed it is publicly, she kind of wrote this by accident as a present to her husband. And then her daughter said, why don't you try and get it published? She had written a fiction book years and years earlier. And she did this very strange thing. Her and her husband, at the time when they knew that they were in danger of losing their property, they self-published a fiction book which she had written, and they offered every reader free entry into a prize draw with every purchase of this book. And the prize was their home in Wales, debt-free. And I calculated it, and I think if they were trying to do a sort of Omaze-style prize, the book was £6.50. They would have had to have sold several 100,000 copies to pay off all their debt. The crazy thing is she sold 2 million copies of her next book. So I don't think people would have bought it if it wasn't true, because I think what people connected with was the fact that these were middle-aged, everyman heroes. Everybody sort of, right off the back of coronavirus, we had suffered loss, we had suffered economic hardship, and here was somebody who was talking about a story of losing everything and having this medical diagnosis. It just hit everything that the public was feeling in that moment, I think. And the truth of it, which is something that's been repeated over and over, Penguin call it unflinchingly honest, the movie says true story, the truth of it is really what sells it, I think.
How do you, let's talk a little bit again about that process. We had a piece in The Observer when all of this started going from a woman called Amelia Fairney, who now, interestingly, works for an organization called Full Fact that helps people figure out whether what they see is true or not. But she worked for Penguin for 28 years and spoke quite honestly about publishers are there to sell a product, and what a product is selling, they want to keep selling it. And indeed, tell us about the sales of The Salt Path and its sequels.
Yeah, I helped hugely. The Salt Path had sort of fallen off the bestseller list, and I put it back up there. So, yeah. My father, who didn't know anything about it, read my article and called me and said, I've gone out and bought a copy of the book.
Yeah, I know at least 5 people who went and,
Yeah,
but, you know, who had never read it.
Exactly. And what's interesting, actually, is that there is a 4th book, and it had been written, and its date for release was already out there when my article came out. And Penguin have delayed it. But Amelia Fairney, who knows Penguin, she worked there for 20-odd years, I said to her, well, surely they're not going to release the 4th book now. And she said, oh, of course they are. I would put all my money on them releasing it because it will be a huge, huge hit. And I said, really? And she said, wouldn't you buy it? And I said, God, I'd find it really hard not to buy it. I want to know what she's going to say. So, yeah, I think Penguin may release the 4th book. The question is, are they asking her to rewrite it, is the question that I want to know. But I've got no in Penguin. So if anyone knows anyone that works for Penguin and wants to talk, I'm in the market.
There's someone
Someone over there.
The one thing that's made me feel skeptical is the people you have said that met them, but not exactly as she described in the book. And I think that's because people love feeling like they're part of something. So how much of that do you think is genuinely they've lied, and how much of that is the people you've met kind of want to feel like they're part of uncovering something, so aren't actually, like, are misremembering and then being like, oh, no, they lied about it. So maybe it was 2 years, maybe it was actually when they said.
We're just going to go over here as well.
Chloe, it's a staggering piece of journalism. I mean, I'd not read it, and I stopped and read the whole thing in the middle of doom scrolling, lots of other things. But I wanted to ask about the timing of the film, because it feels like the makers of the film, there must have been a multi-million, thousands of people involved. Did they have any idea that your article was coming, including the actors in the film?
So the 2 questions are, how do we kind of verify the people who came to you and said this is not true, and the timing of the film?
Okay, I'll take the first one very quickly, which is, for example, the Parsons, this Australian couple who claimed that they met them 2 years later. The reason I know that's true is because they blogged about it at the time. And the reason I found them is because they posted a photo of them with the Walkers, which are clearly Rayner Winn and Moth, on their blog, and said, met this wonderful couple today. And that was in 2015. So the blog is there. It was already there before I even contacted this couple. So they definitely met them in 2015. I mean, that was for sure. And the other people I've met are all people that I have reached out to. Almost all of them. There's been very few who've got in contact with me. There has been 1 or 2. But most of them are people that I and other people working for us have dug and found. And we verify everything that we publish. The second thing, the film. So we don't. Everyone that was involved in this investigation, Penguin, the Walkers, the film company, I offered to go and meet all of them and lay out my investigation beforehand. Rayner Winn and Moth, I think I've calculated well over a dozen times I've requested an interview or even an off-the-record chat with them, and they won't engage. With the film company, I did the same. I said, look, I've come across some really worrying information. Can I come and meet you and talk through with you? And they wouldn't. And I have to say, I sent lots of messages to Gillian Anderson's press person and said, if Gillian wants a bottle of wine, off-the-record chat, just the 2 of us chatting away. No take on any of that. So no response at all. Huh? Oh, it's been out for ages. It came out a month before my investigation came out. So, and interestingly, it's been entered for a BAFTA, which was very strange. And I went down and had a look at the BAFTA screening. There were 8 people in the cinema. So,
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's what we have time for.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you so much, Chloe.
Thank
you all.
Thank you. Thank you.